Good morning, everyone. There's a quorum in the room, so I ask you to take your seats so we can get started. Good morning and welcome to the Community and Protective Services Committee. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Bienvenue au Comité des services communautaires et de protection. Before we get started with the agenda, I would like to provide an update on the city's taxi and limousine regulation and service review, which was approved by Council in June as part of its strategic initiatives. Today we are posting 2 discussion papers on Ottawa.ca as part of this comprehensive review of the city's taxi and limousine industries. These papers focus on detailed case studies of regulations in other jurisdictions and Ottawa's existing hired vehicle regulations. During the coming weeks, 4 more discussion papers will be released on the city's website. Au cours des prochaines semaines, 4 documents de travail supplémentaires seront affichés sur le site web de la ville. They will examine emerging issues, taxi economics, customer experience, and accessibility issues in the taxi and limousine industry. Residents are encouraged to read the papers online and provide their feedback by using one of the following methods: by email at taxi@ottawa.ca, on Twitter using the hashtag #OttTaxi, on the city's Facebook page, by phone at 613-580-TAXI or 580-8294, or by participating in a work group by pre-registering by email. Residents can also get involved in the review by subscribing on Ottawa.ca for email updates that will include notification of the release of discussion papers, the policy options, and opportunities to participate in webinars. The consultant's final report will be completed in December, and in early 2016, the Community and Protective Services Committee will consider a staff report based on the recommendations from the review. The review is examining the current regulatory framework and service delivery to residents and visitors with the primary objectives of ensuring public safety, accessibility, and consumer protection. Public input is a significant part of this review process, and it will help guide Council's decisions going forward. That's why I encourage residents and stakeholders to take part in this consultation process and make their opinions count. Now, before we turn to our agenda items for today's meeting, I would like to acknowledge the work of a very committed and knowledgeable employee. I saw him in the room a little while ago. Most of you know Philip Powell in Bylaw Services. He's back there. Philip is retiring on Friday after a 30-year career with the City of Ottawa. And Philip, we are very sorry to lose you, especially right now. So, Philip, on behalf of my colleagues on the Community and Protective Services Committee, and I know all of Council, our very best wishes to you on your retirement, and don't be a stranger. Okay, so turning to our agenda then, we'll start with declarations of interest. Seeing none, confirmation of minutes 7 from September 17th. Carried. Communications as listed.
I have a question on the response to my inquiry.
Do you want to hold that item? I think it has to 2/3 to lift the item. So on lifting the item, is that carried? Okay, so we'll hold that item and return to it. Item number 1, Accessibility Advisory Committee 2015 Work Plan. Brian Wade, the chair of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, will be here to speak to that, so we'll hold that item and return to it. Item number 2, Arts, Culture, Heritage, and Recreation Advisory Committee 2015-2016 Work Plan. Does anybody want to hold that? Okay, that's held. There's no one here to do a presentation, but we can take the questions. So, Brockington and Egley, hold that one. Item number 3, Arts, Culture, Heritage, and Recreation Advisory Committee.
No, number 3.
Oh, sorry. And then item number 4, the Older Adult Plan Update and Approval. Did I miss one? Okay.
Questions?
Wait a second.
Have to receive the status update.
Okay, so received on the status update, item number 3. Received?
Received.
Okay, and then item number 4, we're holding for presentation and their questions. Item number 5, there's a verbal update, so that item's being held. Item number 6, Ottawa Fire Services, there's a presentation on the provision of dispatch services to other municipalities, so that item's being held. And then item number 7, the Parks, Recreation and Cultural Services Department Public Art Policy Renewal, and there's a presentation, so that too will be held. So hope nobody has any plans for today. Okay. Returning then to the first one, communications, Councillor Fleury has a question.
I do have questions, and thank you for the response. It's important for me to set maybe the frame here is that we do have great responses from bylaw services. Generally, our 311 is coordinated with those responses. I would like us to, and I'm aware currently that, we have commitments that the officers do go out following the call. I'd like us to get to a point, and I know that we're not there today, I know that it would require budget pressures, but I'd like to hear from you, Chief DeMonte, on the discussion that we've had relating to how would we get there if we were reimagining the idea that we set a certain timeline. So someone calls at 11 o'clock, that same night we get someone out. I'd like to hear from you on what that would take in terms of budget pressures or in terms of processes to implement such a process.
Through you, Chair, as we've had some previous discussions, so it's a completely different business line, because your initial question was you were comparing to the paramedic service, which is legislated, and there's a whole process. So we'd have to go back, and now this question, we'd have to go back and look at it. Bylaw is a very different, and pardon the pun, a very different animal with regards to some of the business lines that they do and the way they receive calls. So first you'd have to identify the priority of those different calls. Does a noise complaint come before a dog bite and that type of thing? Secondly, you'd have to identify with the resourcing that you have the response that would like to have, and those are policy decisions that we would have to make. So I'm trying to paint a bit of a picture. We could do the work, we can go back and do the work, but certainly it would end up creating, without a doubt, and without even doing the work, clearly pressures with regards to moving into that type of model. The model doesn't exist elsewhere in other municipalities. They're very similar to our model. And I guess the question that, and again, we could have a more fruitful discussion when we go back and do the work and give you the answer to it. The question would be the value of that versus what we're doing now today. I mean, I would submit to you that the bylaw services provides actually a very good service. Certainly could always be better, and we could prioritize things differently, and we take direction from you on that. We can have fruitful discussions, but to go to this type of model, maybe going down an area that would be very complex, that would require significant work, I would assume at the end would require significant resourcing, and then, the value of that versus what we currently have that actually provides very good service when we compare to our other benchmark municipalities across the province. If there are areas we can improve, perhaps maybe that would be a better approach, but we can take direction, and if you wish, we can go back and do that work for you.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a conversation of, I'm not trying to add pressures, budgeting pressures or others, but at the same time, I was quite surprised last year, and I know that efficiencies are found in different areas, and, I think you heard from council this week that we want the metrics on the operational efficiency so that we know where those are, and we can then turn to our community and say, is this palatable, is this acceptable? And I think that the elements such as bylaw responses, when we have proper metrics, become very important. Roger and his team have done a great job for my area. I know that I'm the highest call volume. We have a weekend tracking and so on. But I wonder if it'd be the benefit of committee to have such a more of an open process especially on the metrics front, because I do believe that we are offering a good service. I do believe that in 99% of the occasions we do respond timely, but at the same time, it's a sliding scale in terms of our ability to staff accordingly, and that's something that around the table for areas that receive less complaints they might not be aware of. So I wonder if, Madam Chair, we could give a direction to staff to build maybe a quick briefing note on what it would take to build the metrics in terms of volumes for noise calls on weekends. I'm not trying to do it all the time. I think that there's a specific time where it becomes relevant to us, and that would be on Friday evenings, Saturday evenings, and on long weekends on Sunday evenings.
Chair, just for some clarity, we could absolutely take that back, not a problem. Are you specifically, because you said noise calls, do you want the whole kind of realm of work of bylaw, or specifically the noise?
This is specific to noise calls.
Okay,
because
fair enough.
There is urgencies with intensification and with maintaining quality of life in neighborhoods. At times in the evening, it's been an issue between police and bylaw in the past. We fixed that, additional hours to 311. I just want to continue in that regards and try to open up the process and see if we can continue to see improvements for our community.
Chair, we can take that direction, no problem, and get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on this item? Received?
Received.
Okay, item number 1, the Accessibility Advisory Committee, a work plan. And we'll ask Brian Wade to come forward. Good morning, Mr. Wade.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for allowing Accessibility Advisory Committee to have this opportunity to present to you this morning. Tabled before you is our work plan for this term of council, and we've had a lot of work gone into this report with our stakeholders at the Accessibility Office, our Councillor Liaison, Councillor Caudry, and of course the City Clerk's Office. So the committee is really excited about this work plan, and we definitely want to get working on it as it is. And my purpose for speaking to you this morning is to encourage you to approve the committee under the work plan as it is. I understand that the Infrastructure Service Department has a suggestion regarding Objective 2, Activity 3, and they're recommending that the AAC is provided an annual report as opposed to an opportunity to provide some input as the barrier retrofit program is carried out throughout the term. And from the perspective of the committee, we definitely believe that we would like to have the opportunity to present our feedback as soon as possible as projects are working through their process, and to have those comments up front as opposed to wait until everything is finished and then provide our comments, which may not be able to be put into practice until the next term of council. So we would greatly appreciate if you could approve the work plan as is, so that we can have that opportunity to provide input as soon as possible, so that our feedback could be at least heard. And we do understand that sometimes it's not always possible, but we do like to have the opportunity to provide feedback as soon as possible. So that is my comments for this morning, and I'm open for any questions or comments from the committee if you so see fit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wade. There is a question, starting with Councillor Egley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you for coming down today, and thank you for the hard work on the report. And I'm not sure if the questions are going to be directed towards you or towards staff or some combination. So one of the things that struck me was there's no indication of any financial impact in the comment section. And a lot of these initiatives clearly are coming from an existing funding envelope or new funding to come forward in the budget process. So I'm wondering if someone can sort of comment on that, sort of what the overall budget might be for the next year for these various initiatives, and where that funding is coming from.
Unfortunately, I can't provide any input to that. I think that's more of a staff.
No, I appreciate, and that's why I said at the beginning I wasn't sure whether it was staff or yourself.
We'll just give them a second.
Sorry, I was out of the room when the question came in. So I understand the question is concern about money not associated with
The report under
no
the comment section says no financial implications. Clearly there are. A number of these initiatives are either coming out of existing pockets or are going to be part of, I assume, the 2015 or 2016 budget ask. So I'm trying to get a sense of where that money's coming from and how much overall we're going to spend in the next year on accessibility initiatives.
Okay. In the absence, I know, of not having city clerks here, in terms of who can provide that response, it's my understanding is that overall we have a financial plan that supports the work plan of all the advisory committees, and it would be rolled up into that.
And do we know when that's coming forward? And to which committee that's going to be going, so we can ask some questions?
Well, it's the clerk's department under Mr. O'Connor. That would, Leslie Donnelly is not here, that oversee the management of the advisory committees, and it's my assumption that those funds would fall under that group.
Okay. It's not that I don't think it's a great plan, it's just to deal with it in a void and not knowing whether we have the funding for it or where the funding's coming from is a little bit difficult.
Can we take this as a takeaway and get back to you? And I apologize.
Why don't we go, we have a number of other questions. Why don't we
Yes.
see if we can get some firmer answers for Councillor Eglai, and then we'll return to that question before we finish.
Yeah, and I have actually a couple other questions
Okay.
as well. One of the initiatives is Objective 1, Activity Number 5, Outdoor Play Spaces, Accessible Park Design. And the strategic objective is advance equity and inclusion for the city's diverse population, and service enhancement would be to the accessibility barrier removal program. So it was my understanding when we design a park or we put in new play structure or splash pad, we're already doing this work. Is that not correct?
Chair, yes, that is correct. When we're doing building a park or a facility, we would be applying accessibility standards as part of the base planning for that facility.
So this is really an acknowledgement of, Mr. Shane, you have an existing program rather than an enhancement on something that we're already doing?
That would be my understanding, that the committee would assist in applying existing standards and norms that the departments use in developing facilities, but not anything over and above what those norms are.
Okay, thank you for that. And then the two more quick questions. One is, again, Objective 1, Activity Number 8, Accessible Taxis. And it says to develop a taxi strategy, and the initiative will be the taxi regulation review. Are we using taxi in the generic form there? In other words, are we also going to be looking at the accessibility issue in other services such as flight or Uber? Is that part of it as well, or are we just focusing in on a traditional cab?
That will all be part of the review, and accessibility is one of the key principles that we're looking at in terms of new technology and how that service can be provided in the future. So it will address it right across the board.
Perfect. I'm glad to hear that. And then finally, and I guess this is for Mr. Chenier, there's the discussion of the sports strategy, and the timeline is 2015, and our runway in 2015 is getting smaller and smaller, so I'm wondering when that's going to be coming to committee.
The plan is now Q1 of 2016, simply because we've run out of runway space in terms of number of committees and the legislative agendas. So we are looking at the first opportunity in Q1 of 2016.
Okay, thank you for that. Should I be asking my question to Deputy Clerk? Morning, Leslie. So the question that I posed earlier was, we're on the accessibility report, and under the comments section, it says there are no financial implications. And so I'm a little confused by that, because obviously there are existing initiatives, there are new initiatives. They're either coming out of existing pockets of money, or they're going to be part of budget asks going forward into 2016. So I'm wondering when we're going to get that information. And the acting deputy city manager said there's a report coming forward from your office, which is going to support all of the various work plans coming forward. I'm wondering when that's going to happen, and if today you can tell us how much is anticipated to be spent on accessibility initiatives in the 2016 year.
Chair, I'm a bit confused. I will confess in terms of the question and the approach. The Accessibility Office reports up through the City Manager. They would be responsible for developing those things. Typically, this is done within line items of existing budgets. In terms of specific funds for advisory committees, there are no new funds. So if the question is financial implications for the work plan, those would be brought forward as part of the typical annual budget process to be dealt with by councils in successive years. They would be identified as accessibility initiatives or as something that was included in a work plan. So I'm a little, I hope that answers a question, but
well, it does, but it opens up another one. So
okay.
I want to get back to Ms. Jones' comment that apparently there's this report coming forward from your office that's going to speak to the financial implications of all the work plans.
I'm sorry, that is not what I meant to articulate. My comment was that the overall management of advisory committees, which the clerk oversees, there are associated budgets that support it overall. If I misconstrued, I did not indicate there would be a report coming specifically. I think further to the deputy clerk's comments is it will form all part of the budget process, and in terms of if there are new initiatives, they may become new budget pressures, but anticipated at this point there are no new monies, and that advisory committees will be working within that envelope.
And that's
Correct.
That helps.
Correct.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Egley. Moving on then to Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I wanted to thank Mr. Wade for coming in this morning and providing the overview, and for his leadership as well on this committee. I'm happy to trumpet the successes of River Ward residents, which Mr. Wade is, and thank you again for your work on the work plan and the committee. I just had one quick question. I didn't come prepared to ask any questions, because I do appreciate and support the work plan, but is the involvement of the advisory committee with respect to para-transpo and OC transpo directed in a different way, or should it be part of this work plan, or am I missing it? I just wanted to know, with the review that Paras is tackling right now and sort of ongoing issues related to transportation, whether that's being addressed or whether that's done through OC Transpo through another means.
Okay, so I see Mr. Box has just come into the room, and I'm wondering, Mr. Box, if you should be answering the questions, specific questions on this item from the staff perspective. So maybe, Councillor Brockington, if you could just repeat your question for Mr. Box.
So my question was, and I think Mr. Wade or even councillors on the committee could answer this as well, but my question is related to the work plan for the Accessibility Advisory Committee. It's very detailed and comprehensive, but I fail to see it mentioned how the advisory committee will be providing comments, ongoing comments with respect to para-transpo, OC transpo, or other public transit. Is that part of their mandate? And if it is, where is that captured?
Part of the Accessibility Advisory Committee's mandate is to comment on public policy that's developed that comes up through the standing committees, and the opportunity for them to comment on that would be at the advisory committee. They can pass motions or draft reports to come up to the standing committees, or they can present to the respective standing committees when they're dealing with those items.
Is it fair to assume, though, that the advisory committee is and has taken an active role in the paratranspo consultations and continues to provide ongoing feedback and advice on those services?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure, I've made the assumption, but I just want to confirm that this advisory committee is active in the current round of paratranspo consultations, and as part of their ongoing mandate, they continue to provide comments, feedback, advice on paratranspo service delivery, OC Transpo service delivery, or any other public form of transit.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I know OC Transpo has presented to the advisory committee on multiple occasions, and I believe they've extended the invitation for consultation.
Okay, so my
advisory committee members.
Final question would be, is it not a part of the work plan because it's just a normal inherited task that is part of the advisory committee anyway, and we're just identifying sort of new objectives that are going to be germane to this term of council? Is that sort of what I'm getting out of this?
It's my understanding that they have a subcommittee, the advisory committee has a subcommittee that does comment on OC Transpo or other OC Transit initiatives, but because OC Transpo is federally regulated, it's not a specific part of their mandate with respect to the city's policy, but OC Transpo certainly takes their feedback into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
And I can tell you, when I was the chair of the Transit Committee, there was a lot of work between the Advisory Committee and the Paratranspo people. Yeah. Anything else, Councillor Brockington? Okay, Councillor Kadri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Wade, for coming in this morning to do a presentation. And I just want to make a couple of comments about the Advisory Committee before I go and answer some of the questions that have been raised on the table. I think this Advisory Committee is working very, very well under the leadership and guidance of the Mr. Kirkpatrick's office in terms of Mr. Box and Ms. Guess, providing some advice along with the committee coordinator, Carol Legault. This committee, because it's made up of all members other than myself, which is a liaison member of the council, basically comes to the committee with open eyes in terms of the experiences that they've felt in the city related to accessibility issues. They come and discuss those issues and see what they need to do with those issues going forward. But they do have a work plan that is identified as of this morning and in previous term, that they are based on an advisory basis to report back to any of the standing committees, especially this Community and Protective Services Committee, with not only their work plan, but if there are any suggestions to be made to come through this committee. So that is basically their role. In terms of the questions that have come up on the table, the financial issue, yes, there may be some financial impacts, but majority of that work is done through already identified dollars, whether it be through clerk's office or through Mr. Kirkpatrick's office under the accessibility office that is part of his responsibility. In terms of plans for the park, the Accessibility Advisory Committee basically works similar to an association with not quite the similar powers to say, look, if there's a park issue being raised in terms of accessible issues, then they do speak about that issue. They do put some suggestions forward to the Parks and Rec people, and as Mr. Cheney mentioned, most of those plans are already in the new parks going forward, but if there is an accessibility issue that arises, then that department handles that issue within their own organization, working with the Accessibility Advisory Committee. In terms of the transpo issue, Accessibility Advisory Committee has been fully involved in through the new acquisition of paratransport buses, where they have had I would say, significant amount of input in terms of those vehicles being purchased, where they've actually, members of the Accessibility Advisory Committee have actually gone out to OC Transport and tested some of those buses with some of the disability issues that were raised, as well as the LRT program. They've had some extensive comments on that particular program, and they made some changes. OC Transport has made some changes, not maybe significant to you and I, but significant enough to the people with disabilities to make improvement on those on that facility coming forward. In terms of the mandate of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, as I said in my opening comments, they're an advisory committee, and they take that role very seriously. Even though they're advisory committee, they do take that role very seriously, and they have fulsome discussions. Sometimes our meetings go till 2.5, 3 hours into the evening, but that's how committed this group is. And I just want to assure everybody sitting on the table that as a liaison person for council on this committee, I'm also responsible in terms of coming back to council. In the future, if you do have any questions, yes, great to ask them at the committee, and which I appreciate, but I also would prefer if you would put forward those comments to me through the chair, and we'll definitely provide you written answers and written responses going forward. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Cadre. Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question, and I think it's to staff, but Mr. Wade may want to comment as well. In the report which precedes the Accessibility Advisory Committee work plan, there's talk of how the Accessibility Advisory Committee's role is changing a little bit, and reading here from the second paragraph on page 3. It says, after the City of Ottawa's Municipal Accessibility Plan report is approved by Council, AAC members receive a presentation and can provide comments on the program. Now, in the preceding paragraph, there is talk that there is some kind of consultation strategy associated with the Municipality Accessibility Plan, but I'm just curious why the Accessibility Advisory Committee isn't the consultation conduit through which we would look to hear from people with disabilities to comment on the plan as opposed to something different. So, I mean, because I would think that as council we would want to hear from the AAC before we approve the plan as opposed to letting them comment on it after we've approved it. Thanks.
So the AAC is advised, or is consulted rather, in the development of the Municipal Accessibility Plan. They're also provided with status updates prior to the report being finalized and coming to committee.
Okay, but that's not what the report says. The report says after the COMAP report is approved by Council, AAC members receive a presentation and can provide comments on the program. So what you're saying is there's actually a process through which the AAC is consulted before the plan comes to Council, correct?
The report was drafted by the committee, but I can assure you that we consult with the committee prior to the report coming to committee and Council.
Thank you for the clarification. Madam Chair, I note there's a hand up over there.
If I can just add to that, there are two parts to the Accessibility Advisory Committee's role with respect to the accessibility plan. Not only are they involved in the development, but once it's tabled, they actually look at the implementation and how we're doing and how the city is progressing on this. So it's actually a before and after. They're deeply engaged in both what should we do and then how are we doing on what we say, if that helps.
Okay, I don't have anyone else. Oh, Councillor Kakush.
Thank you, Chair. I do just want to pick up on Councillor Nussbaum's point. On page 3, the top paragraph does say a recommended change under the responsibility from provide input and feedback to receive an annual update. So why are we recommending that change if you're saying we're still consulting with them in the report?
I have to defer that question to the chair of the committee because I know that we do have ongoing consultation and we definitely consult with them prior to the completion of the report. And as the deputy clerk indicated, we also report back on the status of progress on the work plan.
Okay. So is there, Deputy Clerk, anything you can add on that in terms of why we're recommending the change?
I don't think it's so much recommending a change as reflecting council's change in governance to the advisory committees, which was very specific to all advisory committees, which noted that advisory committees were to essentially deal with their role in terms of term of council priorities and city plans and not go beyond what the city is doing to deal with provincial issues, to deal with other things as they come forward. This is reflective of all advisory committees working on term of council priorities, city initiatives, and that being their focus. I apologize if it wasn't worded with more clarity. Does that?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Deputy Clerk. It is the wording on page 3, the first bullet, that is, I think, misworded perhaps then. And I just want to add to Councillor Brockington's points too about the paratransport, because I'm Vice Chair and chairing that subcommittee, so it's a very exhaustive list. We've had 20 sessions which have all been filled to their limits, so we've had good consultation with various stakeholders, and that's been an exhaustive process, and we're going to be reporting back on that in Q1 of 2016 as well. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Kakish. Anyone else? Carried on item number 1. And thank you very much again, Mr. Wade, for being here this morning and for all your work and the work of your committee. Item number 2, Arts, Culture, Heritage and Recreation Advisory Committee 2015-2016 Work Plan. There were 2 members of council asked to hold this, starting with Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to request that the work plans become more standardized. The Accessibility Advisory Committee, I think, is a little more detailed than what I see before me for arts, culture, and heritage. And maybe this is just a minor point, but there seems to be a lack of detail with the arts, culture, and heritage one, but maybe that will come out as I ask my questions. First, I'd like to ask some questions about activity 2 under objective 1, which is to assist staff in the development of activities at Lansdowne Park and City Hall. I'd like to know why this is part of the work plan. I'd like to know why these 2 projects in particular have been identified and why we aren't focusing on other community parks and recreational services that are desperate for this type of attention. So who can answer that question?
Madam Chair, I think I can take a shot at it. This advisory committee, when they looked at their terms of reference, understood that one of the first things that they should be involving themselves as part of their work plan was to look at the term of council priorities and to look at what was coming up ahead of it during the term of council, and to concentrate their work on those aspects. Next step that they took was to develop a subcommittee which took all of the strategic priorities that are in the this term of council priorities, recently approved by council this summer, and went through them one by one and decided on which ones they thought they would focus their work on. The one specific to Lansdowne and City Hall, that is a strategic priority that included a small amount of funding for this term of council to sustain what has started to be a volunteer-based programming of both Marion Dewar Plaza and public spaces at City Hall, at Lansdowne Park, and to provide some financial support to not only sustain that volunteer initiative, but to actually grow it moving towards 2017. And so the committee has decided, and very specific to this location in Lansdowne Park, they wanted to look at the blend of cultural and recreational activities that were being invited to animate those spaces. And I think, at least as part of the initial discussion on this, trying to put a variety of cultural products into the menu of those activities. So that is a bit of the background about how this ended up on there and what the committee's focus is on.
And I sincerely appreciate that explanation. But these 2 projects receive a significant amount of attention and resources already by paid staff, And like every other member of council, I have parks, recreational, even a lack of cultural services in my ward that is not getting anywhere near the attention that these two projects, as just explained, have been and will be getting. So is there a focus on local community, neighborhood parks and recreational services? Is there a focus on how to reach less economically advantaged households and getting those children and adults involved in recreational programming that they can't afford? Will this be part of their work plan? Will the advisory committee be looking at what we're currently offering in these neighborhoods and how we're doing outreach, and not put as much tension on Lansdowne Park and City Hall?
Madam Chair, the committee has expressed interest in looking at other initiatives that the department is working on, but that are not specifically in the term of council priorities. They would include things like the sports strategy that was mentioned as part of a question earlier on, that doesn't include a component of getting community groups and communities in general that are not currently actively involved into sports activities, which would include activities in local neighborhood parks, community centers, those kinds of things. So even though their work plan did focus primarily on strategic initiatives for this term of council, they've also expressed and have already commented on, and since this committee started its term, have already been involved in commenting on other types of activities, and it would, of course, be the department's intent as we roll out things like the sports strategy, the Healthy Kids partnership that we have with public health, those types of initiatives that we would involve the committee in getting their advice on those matters as well.
I'm just going to ask Ms. Donnelly if she could just explain a bit more about the process at this point, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. These are advisory committee work plans where the city's very committed and expert volunteers are coming forward and letting the committee know how they believe they can best add value to the city's plans and to council's priorities. This committee can amend, look at, go forward. So, Councillor, if Councillor wished to, say, offer an amendment that would direct staff to work with the advisory committee to see if the committee could investigate programming across, volunteer, or whatever, this committee has the opportunity to do that, Chair. It would have to go back to the advisory committee because these are volunteers. They have a work plan. Their goal is to achieve something of value to this committee and to council as a whole. So that would be the process.
Yes, I appreciate that, and I wanted to get my questions out, and then we'd discuss about next steps. But I would not put forward an amendment to the work plan without first asking this to go back to the committee and consider what I and maybe others, because I want to hear what other people have to say about this for the committee for the advisory committee to discuss and amend. My other question is regarding under Objective 3, the first activity. I'm a little confused about what is envisioned here. It says that the advisory committee will review, study community needs based on councillors' priority projects and advise on the prioritization of the facility upgrades. How will this be done? How does the advisory committee know what the needs are in my community? How do they know what my priority projects are? I just find this a very odd descriptor as part of their work plan, and I'd like to know what is envisioned.
Madam Chair, I believe that the committee is aware that some significant capital dollars have been made available, and that at some point, as part of the budget process, a list of community projects would be coming forward. And I think this was simply them expressing their wish to be able to comment on the projects that have been identified.
I guess my gut reaction would be why. They have no strings or links to my community. They're not talking to my community. They have no idea what the priorities are in my community. And although I think they probably have some value in providing comment on recreational services and facilities, I would be somewhat hesitant to ask them to prioritize based on limited funds and where these upgrades or resources should be going across the city. They don't have those links to the community, and yes, their membership may be comprised of people from across the city, but I have concerns with this work plan, and in particular this activity as well. I think this needs to be better thought out and perhaps better articulated in the descriptor itself. I'm not comfortable with the first point I raised with respect to the focus on the Lansdowne and City Hall projects. I think there actually needs to be a statement about what their involvement is at the local level and community level, and enshrine that as part of their work plan. So I'm going to not defer this yet back to the advisory committee because I want to hear from other members of this committee, but I'd be asked once we've gone through that list to put me back on, please.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Eglin.
Well, first of all, I want to echo one of the things that Councillor Brockington said, and that I think it really might be helpful for these reports if there was a standardized template that was used. And the first one that we looked at seemed to have more detail to it, so I support that concept. Question I have is again, under the implication section, we say there are no asset management implications to this report, and yet one of the initiatives is to review and provide input on progress of the recreation infrastructure standards and strategy. It would seem to me that that's a direct asset management implication, potentially, depending on what the advisory committee comes back, and they're going to review the process in any event, but they're going to presumably come forward with some recommendations as to how they think that should change. And of course, our infrastructure that's what we manage. So I'm wondering if staff can comment on why, when putting the report together, there's no indication that there's a correlation between their review of that process and implications that might happen to our asset management process.
Chair, I can answer that question. The advisory committee's role is simply to advise. They make recommendations. There's no delegated authority. They have no voting power to spend money, to do anything but advise council and a committee of council. So they can work, where there would be direct financial implications is if they said, we want the advisory committee to have its own website. Members of council who've been here for a while will recall past requests in that order. We would fill out the saying, this would cost X amount of money. If what they are doing is providing advice and recommendations on staff reports that are coming forward and staff initiatives, those individual initiatives would have the overall financial implications. But in terms of the advisory committee recommendations themselves, their job is simply to advise and recommend. So I hope that clarifies.
I do understand that, but we have a specific section that speaks to financial implications, and then we break it down even further to legal implications, risk management, asset management implication, accessibility impacts. So are you saying that the only time we ever make a comment about any of those impacts if there's a dollar attached to it?
For the advisory committee's work itself. The rest of the initiatives will be coming forward as they do within a normal set of staff reports. So the advisory committee work plans, the financial implications for the cover report is only if the advisory committee is asking for more money for itself to do the work on its work plan. So we've had past advisory committees ask, for example, for a separate budget to go to conferences and budgets to provide feedback to council. We have had advisory committees request separate websites and city infrastructure. That's where the report will come forward. The work plan itself relates, because of decisions council has made in the past, restricts it to city initiatives. And none of the work plans right now are asking for separate dollars to conduct their own consultations or separate websites for them to have essentially independent activity. So that's
I do get that. Maybe we need to take this offline, but we have a specific section that says financial implications, and that's what you're talking about. Then we have about 5 or 6 other implication sections dealing with other issues, I thought, than simply money. But what you seem to be telling me is, even though we break it down into 5 or 6 different categories, every one of them is about $1. Is that what I'm hearing? Because when I think of implications, I'm thinking perhaps they're coming forward with ideas that we would want to implement into one of those areas, like asset management. But you're telling me it's all tied to whether they're going to spend money or not. Is that correct?
In essence, or whether you're giving, it is the money relates not to the city initiatives, right, in the report. It's not referring to the city initiatives. It is referring only to the advisory committee itself. That's the report construct. We can look at changing this in midterm governance as part of the consultations if you like.
I just think it could be a little clearer if all our implications are just about dollars, let's say that, and not break it down into 5 or 6 different categories. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Egley. And maybe we can just at this point give direction to staff to standardize these reports going forward. Maybe we can address some of the concerns that Councillor Egley was discussing. So maybe at midterm governance we could standardize that as part of midterm governance. Okay, thank you. Councillor Fleury.
Before I go into my question, I think what I understand of the previous question is basically very simple, is that if there's a term of council priority, there's an amount attached to the idea, and then that should be reflected through the advisory committees in the amounts that council have decided. Correct me.
Chair, the work plan relates to city initiatives that are the subject to other reports, which each of them will have financial implications separately attached. The financial implications section for the cover report on the advisory committee relates specifically to any costs of the advisory committee doing its work.
Okay. My actual question was about the sports strategy. So, Dan, I know that we're late in the sports strategy, that we won't see it in 2015. I'd like to hear from you because, like, the last term of council, we had discussed a sports strategy and the idea coming forward. It remains something that's very important to keeping to keeping with the times of people staying active, the long-term athlete development, community being physically active, and so on. So I want to hear from you in terms of the sports strategy, what sort of timeline and how come these delays have happened?
Chair, the decision to delay the report was in part due to the legislative agenda for this fall and the timing of the budget. It was also the notion that the strategy recommends a 5-year investment plan in the sports strategy, and the idea that council should go through the budget and have established their budget before looking at this and look at it through that lens. And so because of that, we've moved it to Q1 of 2016. The 2016 budget will have been completed, and then council can look at that. So it was more of a, when is the appropriate time to come forward with a report that provides a comprehensive strategy with a multi-year investment plan and what is the proper lens to consider that under, and so because of that, it was moved out beyond the budget process.
I'm happy to hear the multi-year approach. It's unfortunate, though, that we are delayed one budget year. That will mean that theoretically the multi-year will start only in 2016 if funding is available and if committee and council approve the direction. So I'm happy to hear that, but it is a significant delay. We could have had that multi-year element ahead of this year's budget. That's just a point I'm making.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fleury. Anyone else before I go back to Councillor Brockington? Okay, Councillor Brockington.
So, Madam Chair, I would like to move that we refer this item, back to the advisory committee for two specific purposes. One is for Objective 1, Activity 2, I'm not going to suggest we remove that, but I would like to suggest that an additional activity be added that focuses on the work related to local community, neighborhood services, recreational, cultural park, specifically how we are working with or targeting economically disadvantaged neighborhoods, youth, adults, etc., with that angle. I don't believe it's my role to, at this point, provide the wording of the activity, rather send this back to the advisory committee with my thoughts. They have the discussion, and they come back to us with a potentially revised work plan. And the second item that I'd like to focus on under Objective 3, which is the first activity, just the wording of this description causes me great concern, and I can follow up with the committee coordinator and yourself, Madam Chair, in writing with, I can expand on these points, but I think this can be better articulated, that can perhaps eliminate my concerns, but as worded, I have, as I've stated earlier, concerns about their role with respect to my councillor priority projects as worded in the descriptor. So I can't support the work plan as it's worded now, but if we send this back to the advisory committee, I would be happy to attend the advisory committee in person and share with them my thoughts, but I don't want to direct the advisory committee on what to do, rather flag my concerns and hope that they can revise their work plan.
Okay, so there's a motion to refer this back to the Arts, Culture, Heritage and Recreation Advisory Committee. That motion takes precedent, so we'll deal with that now. Councillor Fleury.
Just to be clear, and I'd love to hear from the clerk on this, but the workload and the ideas, basically it's an advisory committee, it's a consulting membership of councils. So my understanding is that councillors can attend. There is a council liaison for those committees, and at that point, items that are very specific to the work plan or the mandate can be addressed there. I don't know that referral resolves anything where we can actually participate in the discussion of those advisory committees.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think that you could take those concerns to the committee or through the representative, either way, without necessarily doing that. Okay, we've got a bit of a list going, so Councillor Eglai and then Councillor Kadri.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the second point raised by Councillor Brockington, I don't see any issue. The more advice we can get on projects in our ward, I mean, I don't see anywhere in here, and building on what the Deputy Clerk said, we're certainly not giving the Advisory Committee veto power. But in these tight financial times, if we can get input and think outside the box from a variety of sources, I don't see any issue with that whatsoever. Councillor Brockington is free to disagree with recommendations made by the advisory committee, as is his community. So I just think the more views we have at the table, the better we can work on problems. So I'm not going to support referral. I'm happy with the report as is, except for the format, as I pointed out, but that's already been dealt with. So.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eglai. Councillor Kadri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just coming back to the motion as well as the responsibility. The advisory committee cannot and does not make any decision on its own in its own environment. It has to, any advisory committee of the three has to come to a standing committee with recommendations, and it's up to the standing committee as councillors sitting on that committee to make those decisions, either approve or say thank you for the advice, and that's where the issue ends. So in terms of referring it back to the advisory committee, I think this really would not solve any issue. I think the issue remains within this room to say to the members of this committee and assure them that the advisory committee, at least the one that I sit on, is not really there to make any concrete decisions where they're put into play with the city. What they do is advise, either in my case, either through Kent's office or through this committee, to the committee and say, look, this is the advice of the advisory committee on OC Transport, for example, or Paratransport. Then it's up to the standing committee to move that item forward or not. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, seeing no one else, we're going to ask Councillor Brockington to wrap up.
We are being asked today to recommend to council that the work plan be approved. So we have a role today to either endorse the work plan or not. I think the work plan needs to be revised, and I've articulated why. 2 points. The first point is to add a local component. So we flagged the Lansdowne project, we flagged the City Hall project. I'm suggesting we need something in the work plan that discusses or identifies local component. That's number one. The second reason for referring back to the advisory committee is to clarify language. Not to eliminate the activity number one, but to clarify the language of what exactly that's aiming towards. And I think if you have an opportunity to endorse a work plan for this term of council that is going to be articulated and publicly released, that work plan be as accurate as possible and uses language that is clear and concise. So I think the right thing to do is to ask this committee to refer it back to the advisory committee on those two issues, to add a local component and to clarify the language in one of their activities. I think that's fairly standard and straightforward, and I would hope that the committee would support my request. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. We're going to call the vote now. Councillor Shirelli. Councillor DeRose. Councillor Eglai.
No.
Councillor Fleury.
No.
Councillor Middick. Councillor Nussbaum.
No.
Councillor Cadre.
No.
Councillor Kakish. No. Councillor Brockington. Yes. And myself, no. So, well, he missed the vote. Yeah. So that motion loses. So on the report, carried. It has to be approved. Carried. And dissent from Councillor Brockington. Okay, item number 4, Older Adult Plan Update and Approval of the 2015 to 2018 Older Adult Plan, and there is a presentation.
Sorry, I'll take up whatever space I'm given, as you know.
Okay, Mr. Burry, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just going to do a very brief overview of the older adult plan and the processes involved. I do have invited guests who'll be able to answer any questions and illuminate anything with respect to that. The first thing I want to do is acknowledge the work of the Seniors Roundtable, and we're fortunate that we do have 3 members in the audience, Liz Tucker, Margaret Dunn, and Joe McCory, who's also a member of our Aboriginal Working Committee here at the City. In addition, Carol Burrows, who is a speaker and very actively engaged with the development and discussions of this plan, is also here today. I'd also like to thank the Council on Aging, who are responsible for the overall Age-Friendly Ottawa initiative that we've embarked in together as a city. The Older Adult Plan is essentially the city's internal response to developing services and making sure that we have an adult focus and an adult lens. I'd also like to acknowledge with me to my left, I have Colleen Hendricks, city staff, overseeing much of the development of the roundtable, Claire Ferrer, and last but most importantly, Barry Deeprose, who's actually a member of the Seniors Round Committee, and Barry has represented the Senior Pride Network on that table. So thanks for coming today. The older adult plan in the 2012 to 2014 period was approved by the previous council. There was $500,000 devoted to that specific plan, and in addition, there was $500,000 in specific transportation items that are been developed through John Manconi and through Transportation Committee related to seniors and access. This plan, and largely is what we began to see, is that for the individuals 65 years of age and over represent now about 16% of our population. And that's the same as the number of people who are 14 years and younger. So we essentially, as we were beginning to see a change in our character within the City of Ottawa, and this is very important that all departments, and I want to stress that all departments in the city have been involved in development of this plan, and the funding that's provided is really to help us move many of the targets that we've started doing more quickly. The older adult plan for 2015 to 2018, with the 2014 term of council coming to an end, we're now looking at essentially the refresh of the older adult plan for this term. It is aligned with the strategic goals of council. We're using the same vision. There are 51 concrete actions that are focused on areas that are within the city's mandate. Again, as I mentioned, an annual budget of $500,000 with an additional $500,000 for transportation. The Seniors Roundtable will also be reconstituted in 2016 in order to permit the midterm review that's planned for the first quarter in 2017. As with all such term of council plans, it will be refreshed in 2019 in time for the next term of council. The next few slides, I'm just going to highlight a few of these 51 initiatives and the types of area that we're putting some degree of emphasis. One of the particular initiatives in this plan will be to inform older adults about the locations of public washrooms in city buildings, really improve that identification of where those washrooms exist and those that are open to the public. We will also be designating one park per year as age-friendly, focusing again on those elements. Next one. An ongoing project is to review and adjusting the crossing times at large and busy intersections, and I think this is not just for seniors, but for all adults, for those of us who try to race across intersections before lights change. So really focusing on making sure that people can cross these intersections safely, as well as other installations of devices to make them more age-friendly, larger buttons and so on. We also are, a particular initiative going on through planning and growth management is to educate and raise awareness of specific needs of building age-friendly homes. And I can report that there are significant uptake by developers who are now looking at bringing very different products to market, and that's their words, products to market that really focus on the older adult and being accessible and easy for individuals who are aging to live in. Last slide. Next slide. One of the things that also have come through the over 600 individuals who've participated, as well as the ongoing consultations, has been development of a program in this term that will offer one-on-one computer technology assistance and tutoring by teens. Computers are a growing part of our world, and there are many seniors who have difficulty learning how to navigate and move through that. This is a critical program for this group in order for them to remain inclusive in our society. We're also going to look at at least two initiatives with the discussion to prevent and address elder abuse. That's it. Thank you. So that's the end of the presentation, and as I say, the panels here, they're much more better informed on many of the very specific details, and they'll be happy to assist you with any questions that you have.
Oh. Hello. Got to keep my thumb on it here. Well, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for all the work that has gone into where we are today. It's very appreciated. I do have a number of committee members who have questions, starting with Councillor Eglai.
Thank you very much. So a number of the initiatives indicate under the heading OAP funding, no funding. Does that mean no funding at all? Or does that mean the funding is coming from a different envelope?
What it means is that we are, essentially, it's within the internal workings of the departments. So the older adult plan, the funding, is specifically intended to boost what the departments would normally do or their focus. So when we identify certain elements as older friendly, it's because we are shifting the emphasis of services and programs to reflect the population shift, so therefore there isn't a budget impact specifically of that initiative. There are others, however, in order to address and to move more quickly, and that's where the specific funds come in terms of being applied.
So when you use terms like increase, install, strengthen, and say there's no OAP funding, what you're doing is going to an existing department and saying, rather than provide the money to this category or age or community, we're going to take the same money and reallocate it in a different way. So while you're strengthening one piece of it, you potentially are weakening another.
Not necessarily. What you may simply be doing is using an older adult lens and to say, rather than painting a sidewalk this way, paint it that way. There's no additional cost to particularly doing that. Or there's things like looking at intersections where you're buying a different kind of box. Put an age-friendly or an older adult lens on this and start building both the infrastructure as well as the internal programs towards that.
Okay. Next question is about the parking spots to be set aside at city facilities. I'm a little intrigued by that. So how are people going to identify themselves? How are we going to know the right people are parking in the spots or not parking in the spots? Is it going to be similar to the accessibility parking spots? And if so, how do we identify the user of the car?
So at this particular point in time, and I've had discussions with Mr. Chenier who may want to elaborate a little bit more, the specific areas, or for example, one of the prototypical locations that we'd be looking to do this would be an area such as the Nepean Sportsplex. Very, very large parking lots. One of the issues that seniors have raised with us is that we arrive for our programming at 10, and by the time we get there, the parking lot has cars parked all the way up to the back, and we have to walk across the parking lots. The signage, and from my understanding, will be very similar to those signages that are now used in many of the stores related to pregnant mothers parking and so on. It's very much on the honor system to a great extent. So it's to provide the parking and to say these parking are designated and to request that on essentially in the honor system at this point in time. It's not something that we have the ability to enforce at this point in time, but it is something that we would be bringing in as, again, an initiative to start setting aside those spots. The common, comment that I would get from my years in Parks and Recreation before transferring are, why is it that an 18-year-old gets to park at the front door and I have to lug my hockey bag right across the parking lot and I'm 82 years old? So those are essentially, very much as we've done with pregnant mothers and others, is to set aside those front rows and to do it on the honor system.
Okay, a couple of questions about the designation of age-friendly parks. First of all, I'm not sure what that means. Secondly, I'm not sure how you're going to choose which park gets designated. We have 23 different wards. Even if we designate one a year, and it could take 23 years before there's one in every ward. So I'm wondering how you're going to prioritize that. And I'm also very cognizant that Parks and Rec and park infrastructure in particular is a real funding crunch for us right now, just keeping up with I don't know if we're going to have an age-friendly park, I'll call it a normal park. So I go to your point about sort of shifting priorities, but we already have a problem in terms of just maintaining slides and splash pads and what have you. So I know that's a lot of questions. So basically it's what is an age-friendly park? How are you going to decide which ward or which park gets chosen in any given year? And secondly, I'm a little concerned about even the real allocation of funding in that regard, if there is going to be, as you've indicated, no new money.
Right.
When we have, Mr. Chenier has spoken to this committee on a number of occasions about the challenges that his department is having in just keeping up with maintaining the existing infrastructure that we have in the parks.
So what I should have probably started with is that the job of our department is to coordinate this initiative on behalf of all the departments. So I'd actually, my colleague, Mr. Shenjaglin, to speak to your question because this would be their component and what they'd be contributing. So I'll turn it over to Dan.
Chair, the age-friendly park, we already have some experience in building parks like this. We've built one out in Councillor Manette's ward that has been quite successful. It's really about making some decisions in terms of the type of amenities and the type of atmosphere that you're going to create. And so obviously there's a focus away from play structures and sports fields and more of a focus on things that appeal to the older population. So we've started with a reflecting pond, benches, pathways that are easy to navigate, benches that are, have the proper armrests. We've just put in a scented garden in collaboration with the community, and it has been very much a consultative process of what do you want to see in those types of parks. And I suspect that will shift from neighborhood to neighborhood as groups there make those decisions. It can be the rehabilitation of an existing park area, or it may simply be working with planning and growth management to build it right into a new park as you're developing it, if you know there's going to be an older adult population in that neighborhood. But we're already getting good traction in terms of putting in the kind of more passive amenities into a park in a way that makes sense. There seems to be some uptake in terms of these places becoming popular with seniors to take walks in, to simply go and do more passive activities than a traditional play park for children.
Okay, I'm not sure I got answers to my questions. So my question was, now I know what it is, but how do you decide in any given year that this is the park you're going to designate? How you decide which ward, which community is going to get that particular type of park?
Chair, as was the case in Orleans, it would be through consulting with the community about what they want to see in the park and the ward councillors. As the population ages, there appears to be across the city an interest in developing at least portions of parks to appeal to this kind of an activity. So to me, it would be very much a consultative process as we look at either doing major rehabilitations of parks or where, we already have passive parks where some of the basic infrastructure is already there, and all we need to do is perhaps add a few more benches, a few more amenities that the local community would want to see.
We're getting closer to an answer. So you have 6 communities that say, I want an age-friendly park this year. And I've got some, let's even spice it up a little bit. I have some CIL money that I want to put towards that park if the city will match funds. How do you decide which of those 6 is going to, because we're only going to do one a year, as you said, so how do we decide which of those parks it's going to happen in?
Chair, I'm not sure we've worked out that fine level of detail, although I think as we look at the park inventory, there will be a few best opportunities to select from and probably even fewer sources of funding to choose from as well. But as a pilot, I think it's a reasonable attempt to at least do one, but perhaps we can do others if there is good success and we're able to show that. There may be other councillors through CIL that want to fund a portion of their park in this way, and we could do more.
I'm just going to make one final comment and build on something you said. I like the sound of portions of a park, because a park is in a community and you have older people and disabled people and younger people and everything else. And I saw Councillor Brockington nodding his head at that comment as well. So I don't know if it's direction or modification by motion, but perhaps what we should be looking at is a portion of the park. And might I suggest if we did that you might get more than one a year. You might be able to spread that money out so you get 3 or 4 parks that are partially designated age-friendly, if you will. So I look to the clerk's office. I don't know if the clerk's office is here, whether this would be a direction to staff to modify it, or whether that would actually require a motion, because I think we could get bigger bang for the buck if we put parts of a park designated to a particular purpose, and then you'd have more of a community park. So I don't know how we do this.
I think one of the easiest ways to take that back to the Seniors Roundtable which will be having those discussions in the new year. That's specifically the types of things that we do have the departments walk through with them. And with respect to, just to provide a little bit more background, we had similar issues around where we were going to place benches in the previous term of council. And the benches and much of the initiatives is based on density of seniors. So how the communities are located is where they're most likely to be, where the density is, and then to respond to that density. So I would say the same types of issues would apply here. I'm sure Mr. Chenier and the groups are also looking at not necessarily when you designate a seniors park or part of it, you are looking to make sure that you're balancing what the needs in that community are. We do have some communities now which are becoming largely seniors, and I think those are where the focuses were in the previous round in terms of benches, in terms of access to transit, all of those various areas. So that's what we take back as part of the discussions with the roundtable.
Okay, that sounds reasonable, but if you could report back to us on what you find out. And I'll tell you, one of the first things I did when I was elected first time was I had a request from a grandmother who said, I bring my grandkids to the neighborhood park, but I have nowhere to sit. And so I'm tired out a long time before they are. So we put some benches in that park in a shady place. 5 years later, every time I see this lady, she says, thank you so much for doing that. So that's the kind of thing that I'd like to see going forward. And so maybe you can have the discussion at the Seniors Roundtable and come back. And I suspect the seniors would be more than happy to share their parks with the young people. And so if there's a mechanism for you to report back to us of where you're going on this, because again, I think we're thin in dollars in park infrastructure, and we could spread it around and get more age-friendly aspects in a number of parks.
I think one of the other key pieces of this is certainly through Mr. Chenier and his group, as through the other infrastructure group, is cycling back with councillors specifically about projects that are now planned in their wards, in their areas, because there are the issues, of course, cash in lieu, that where they do have dollars, they'd like to do other investments. I think it would also be helpful, I mean, we did push through a number of projects in the last term as part of that consultation process to make sure we get the bench on the right area, orientated the right way. Some of the different issues that we have, I think, gained quite a bit of experience in from the last term.
So, yes, you will report back to us later?
You'll definitely see a report in 2017, which is part of that. But I think in addition to this, within the internal workings of it, when we are looking, I think, specifically at parks infrastructure that's going into individual wards, that there's a cycle back to individual ward councillors to review what's going to be happening. So it's not like a surprise that a bench or something just shows up. These are the initiatives under the older adult plan. This is what we're doing. And so, yes, reporting back.
Can I just very quickly, can I make one suggestion in that regard too? Because Dan and I will be meeting later about another situation where when we're replacing in a park, it's not always Parks and Rec that makes that decision. It's another city department, and communication doesn't always happen. So things pop up that you do not know about sometimes. So if you could loop in all the relevant departments in that discussion, if I could have that commitment, I think that would be very helpful.
I think that's a key part of this older adult plan, specifically having that loop back. I think one of the, just in terms of the discussion earlier, no matter which segment it is, one of the key things that's is certainly important for councillors, because they do have access to cash in lieu, they are the individuals who are the most on the ground in their communities. They have the best sense of what needs to be done.
And thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair.
I'm council's representative this term. Councillor Taylor was last term. I'm council's representative this term on the older adult plan. So I will commit to this committee that after we've had the discussion in January to report back to this committee on that portion. Councillor Fleur.
Yes, merci Madame la Présidente. Quelques questions. Le plan dans son ensemble semble très bien équilibré. Ce que je veux dire par équilibré, c'est au niveau de l'infrastructure dont on a besoin dans nos parcs. Vous avez parlé des traverses de piétons et tout. Et puis aussi au niveau pratico-pratique, au niveau des services que l'on offre. Un des points que je trouve que peut-être je l'ai manqué dans la lecture, mais au niveau du aging at home. Alors, il y a une stratégie où les gens sont malheureusement isolés. Puis, je suis pas sûr qu'à travers ce plan-là, on est capable d'aller, à travers les groupes communautaires, d'aller les chercher, puis les engager dans des initiatives. Ça demeure un des systèmes qui, d'après moi, il y a un void, là, il y a un manque où on n'est pas capable d'aller chercher les gens qui sont les plus à risque, les personnes aînées les plus à risque, qui sont isolées dans leurs appartements.
Donc, il y a 2 départements qui sont vraiment impliqués dans ce dossier. Le premier, c'est le département santé publique, avec un certain niveau de leur service. En plus, il y a un petit peu de services de nous dans notre département de services communautaires. Enfin, j'ai parlé au début de Age Friendly Ottawa, et eux, ils en ont une responsabilité. Plutôt, le plan que vous avez devant vous, c'est vraiment des services vraiment dans le mandat de la Ville d'Ottawa. Quand vous parlez des services qui sont surtout de santé, de services dans les maisons, il y a beaucoup d'agences et le gouvernement où la responsabilité se reste tellement avec la province. Donc, c'est dans lequel on a 2 parties de ce plan. L'entière de la ville, des choses que nous avons de contrôle direct, au lieu d'avoir une ville qui peut age-friendly, qui ciblée avec des autres. Donc, il y a vraiment 2 parties de toute la stratégie en général.
Parfait. Ça clarifie un peu des éléments. Un autre point qu'on entend souvent chez les aînés, c'est qu'est-ce que je peux faire pour aider ma communauté? On entend beaucoup une énergie, un enthousiasme de continuer à contribuer, que ce soit faire du bénévolat à la mission ou aider d'autres aînés au centre d'accueil Champlain, par exemple. Ouais. Puis, je me demande dans le contexte du plan, je sais que vous parlez directement au niveau des services et des responsabilités de la Ville, mais parce qu'on offre beaucoup de services dans nos bibliothèques, dans nos centres communautaires, je pense à la cabane à sucre à Vanier. Qu'est-ce qu'on fait pour aller stimuler le bénévolat, puis impliquer les personnes aînées, que ce soit 1 heure, quelques heures par semaine, pour nous aider dans ce grand plan-là? Parce que le plan doit passer l'aspect plutôt policy, puis doit être applicable. C'est là où je ne comprends pas nécessairement les liens. Je parlais au niveau de age-friendly, mais je ne suis pas certain qu'on stimule autant le niveau... je sais qu'il y a Volunteers Ottawa, il y a des groupes comme ça, mais je me demande au niveau pratico-pratique, est-ce qu'on demande à nos program coordinators d'être dans les communautés, aller chercher les aînés, faire appel aux différents services où ils peuvent s'impliquer?
Absolument. C'est une partie de le plan. Et je crois que finalement, c'est une autre question qui va reviser aux tables de ronde sur des années, pour cette année. Je peux parler absolument de notre département. Par exemple, dans nos foyers de soins de longue durée, on a une programmation de bénévoles qui est absolument essentielle et nous allons de créer des opportunités le plus tôt possible et les plus fréquentes. En plus, comme vous avez mentionné, il y a la bibliothèque et aussi dans le parc de loisirs, les occasions. Mais je crois que ça parle d'un bon aspect de projet qu'il faut continuer, c'est l'engagement des personnes dans notre communauté. Donc, c'est une autre question qui va être soulignée sur la table de ronde. Et c'est une question qui t'est parlé un petit peu des activités qui n'ont vraiment pas de frais associés avec ou pas un budget. C'est à cause que nous faisons tellement d'activités avec des bénévoles dans notre communauté.
Je crois qu'il faut faire appel à l'ensemble de la communauté où, évidemment, on a des aînés qui sont à mobilité réduite, qui ont des besoins particuliers, puis ça, il faut être là. Mais on a aussi beaucoup d'aînés, je pense aux baby boomers, qui sont à leur retraite, qui veulent demeurer actifs, qui ont peut-être des petits-enfants, mais aussi qui font partie des groupes comme Centre Pauline Charon, Centre des services gigs, ils sont peut-être au patro, à la retraite en action et autres, mais on ne les stimule pas nécessairement à nous aider à la Ville. Moi, c'est peut-être cet aspect-là que je trouve qu'on néglige, puis le plan, d'après moi, corrige pas cet élément-là. C'est que les aînés sont là, ont une expérience, sont capables de créer des éléments de mentorat, sont capables de vraiment offrir de leur temps, puis ils veulent offrir de leur temps, on l'entend beaucoup. Puis à ce niveau-là, je suis pas sûr que le plan répond à cette demande-là, qui va être de plus en plus grande, parce qu'on sait qu'on a une population qui est vieillissante.
Donc, je sais d'en parler, consulter un petit peu avec Colleen. Dans le dernier aspect de conseil, on avait aussi mis sur notre site web un portail pour des services, et c'est vraiment pour encourager des aspects de bonnes nouvelles dans notre communauté. En plus, je crois, on va assurer que c'est une discussion qui va continuer autour de table de ronde pendant les discussions avec le conseil d'Inns. Et puis
Juste pour point final, je pense que si on pourrait commencer quelque part, parce que je reconnais qu'avec la fonction publique fédérale, avec où on débute, ça peut être un enjeu, mais aujourd'hui, on a entendu par exemple Phil Powell qui se retire. Alors Phil Powell a 30 années d'expérience à la ville d'Ottawa. Peut-être que Phil a besoin d'une pause puis ne veut pas rentrer dans du travail à la ville, je comprends. Mais d'un autre côté, on devrait être capable de lui demander qu'est-ce que tu veux contribuer à la ville. Puis ce serait bon si à chaque fois qu'une personne se retire dans le Older Adult Plan, qu'on leur demande qu'est-ce qu'ils veulent faire, est-ce qu'ils veulent... parce que cet aspect-là de mentorat peut vraiment contribuer à où on s'en va, d'après moi.
Oui, absolument. Et puis, il y a certainement des occasions, comme on a vu la semaine dernière avec le série sur les Syriens ici et toute la crise. Il y avait énormément de personnes en retraite, j'ai parlé avec eux, et c'était vraiment une bonne environnement pour connecter les gens vers des services directement, et je crois qu'il y a des autres occasions avec plusieurs de ces sessions pendant le terme, pendant les prochaines 2-3 ans.
And finally, we've done the exercise of the Youth Summit, the Senior Summit, very great exercise where we get multiple residents from across the city. I want to make sure that on the Seniors Roundtable that we have different demographics. What I mean by that is that we have rural representation, that we have different cultural, linguistic representation, but also that we specifically go out and find the isolated senior, engage them, and understand how do they become isolated so that we can build the programs around them and support seniors that have become isolated, because I'm not sure that even aging at home strategies, different community houses, through public health and other mechanisms, I'm not sure we're fulfilling all of the risk factors that are in place. I'll leave it at that. I think it's a general comment. I'm not asking for a response, but I think that we need to make sure that that round table is properly balanced to reflect the most at-risk seniors as well as the more engaged ones.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fleury. Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a very brief comment/question. I noticed in the presentation there was reference to the fact that traffic services will be a coordinating partner, or will be a partner in the coordination effort of this. And a very quick anecdote, we had our budget consultation a couple weeks ago. A 90-year-old woman approached me and said, at my local traffic light on Beechwood Avenue, the signal to get the pedestrian little man on the light is very far away. I'm on my walker. It's not convenient. And then I end up standing there and I don't get a signal. So that's a great example of something where currently traffic services would say it doesn't pass warrants, so there isn't sufficient pedestrian traffic to allow them to put the signal on automatically. And that strikes me as a great example of where, in cases in particular where we have older adults living in that area or a retirement home or so on, could we not modify that warrant and create and make it easier to create those crossing opportunities, especially for seniors? So if that's the type of thing you'll be working on, I would certainly encourage you to look at that issue in particular.
That's what our colleagues in traffic services, again, partners to come to the table. Again, our job is to coordinate this for all the departments and to bring into a consolidated plan. And those are certainly the comments that we brought to their attention. I think the benefit of the older adult plan and the process we've used internally has really to raise awareness of those needs and not to have it automatically come back and say, well, that's not our standard, or that's not the norm. And I think we have changed a number of things on the basis of, and those small investments, and they often are small, is to change, a no to a yes in those instances.
Thank you, Councillor Nussbaum. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to attend this morning to thank members of the Roundtable and our staff as well, and congratulate them on this refreshed plan for this term. Ottawa is getting way ahead of this gray wave that's hitting our shores, and we're quickly becoming recognized leaders for this. And it's something we don't often see here in kind of the microcosm of Ottawa. We're so consumed with our own city business. But on October 7th, the Institute of Research and Public Policy released a report that counsels the federal government or the federal government to come on how to approach a national senior strategy. And it's very much like our plan. In fact, it's almost a transformation of our plan, but onto a national scale. And they're suggesting a set of guiding principles and recommendations, but they suggest that they would work with the federal government, whoever that might be, would work with the territories, provinces, and municipalities in order to ensure that the recommendations were executed on the ground in a way that was appropriate for that community. And that's very much exactly what the document here does. It lays out guiding principles and practices, ways in which we would approach things so that our older adults are not an afterthought to planning, but an included part of it. And then it leaves it to individual departments, and I think Councillor Eagle-Eye, was exploring that a little bit with his line of questioning between, it's great to have the how or the what. It's Mr. Chenier's job to execute the how, in that particular instance. But notwithstanding the ongoing need to tackle those challenges of the practical implementation, I did want to say that we've made outstanding progress here in the city, and it's been recognized not just by the World Health Organization, denoting Ottawa as an age-friendly city, but also by public policy institutes, think tanks, other municipalities, and other jurisdictions across Canada so far, but that ripple is continuing to carry. So I wanted to thank, again, the table and the team for the work that they've done, and certainly recommend, suggest, and endorse that we all support not just this refresh of the plan, and not just at here today and at Council, but also, to Councillor Brockington's point, as we think of our own individual wards, as we think of how we plan our communities, keep the older adult plan in mind when you work on what does your community look like in the years to come, because I know the staff are engaged on a daily basis talking with council colleagues about how we can apply an OAP lens to some decision you're making in your ward. So thank you very much to the staff and to the roundtable members, and thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do as well want to commend the action plan. It's extremely detailed and comprehensive, and it touches upon all segments of the seniors population, so I want to credit you there, and I will not be referring this back to you, so don't worry about that. And as Councillor Taylor mentioned, the gray wave, I've heard gray tsunami. It's a segment of our population that will continue to increase. And when the municipalities have a plan like this in advance, being proactive, it's very great. We have this segment of our society who have contributed over decades, who are veterans and have contributed in so many ways and have paid taxes for decades as well, which they remind me about. But I want our senior population to be active and involved and healthy, and their needs need to be reflected in sort of the overall scope of how we as a municipality move forward. So I completely embrace that and appreciate all the work that's been done. I won't belabor the issues that we've raised about parks and designated parks, about what is the term, age-friendly parks. I think basically my comment will be that should be the ultimate goal in all of our parks. And I don't like putting labels on parks. I don't think we should call them age-friendly. I just think the goal should be all parks, which are community assets for all members of society, should be accessible and age-friendly for all people. So I've never heard a senior say, I go to the park, but I wish there were no kids there, because they actively embrace them. And we don't want to create parks which benefit one segment over another. Parks generally are used by the younger population, but seniors, of course, like to go out for walks, and they engage. And I think we should be not labeling parks with that label, rather aim towards if there are issues in parks that any segment of society have trouble with or you can't fully participate in. The example was given about the park bench by the grandmother. Then we have a responsibility to make sure all of our parks are accessible and welcoming. There's a note about sidewalk repairs, and I appreciate that the action plan needs to advocate on behalf of seniors. I would just push back a little and say we have, at least in my ward, chronic ongoing needs for sidewalks basically in every neighborhood by all segments of that neighborhood. So school kids that are trying to get to school, but there's no sidewalk, that need to cross busy streets, subdivisions that were built 60 years ago with no sidewalks, subdivisions that were built 10 years ago without sidewalks. It's an issue for all members of society, and I just wanted to underline that as well. One thing, I had my budget meeting with the mayor and senior staff last week, and I talked about road signage and how when my family live in the States and when I go down there, particularly to Florida, road signage I think is a lot better. The font of road signage, the font above major intersections, the font of street signs, and that's a segue into my final comment about if you would consider a driving component or a driving focus, that seniors not only want to live in their homes longer, but they also don't want to give up their mobility. And we could have some education about changing laws in Ontario. We've had some changes recently, but also maybe some tips about driving. And, you know, if they have issues driving at night because of deterioration in their sight, some benefits about maybe their community partners to help them go grocery shopping or get to appointments, those types of things. But I think, like I said, the action plan is excellent. It's very comprehensive, and certainly something I'll be voting in favor. And if my comments could be noted, that would be great. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair, and I do want to echo some of the comments of my colleagues, including Mark Taylor, to first of all thank staff. And I'm not sure if you got the chance to see the email that was circulated by the clerk from one of my residents, my seniors in Riverside South, who says, as a senior citizen, I'm delighted and eager to enjoy the many improvements, programs, and activities directed to my age group. It's nice to see the city plan for and implement programs designed for this growing demographic. So I thought I'd share that with you, and an appreciation of some of the residents. I wanted to talk a bit about that $500,000 and then the funds that we've allocated for this, and just so far where most of that budget has been allocated. I know, so you have that, and then you work internally with the various departments, and I know there's been some great programs with Ottawa Public Health, where we work with seniors to strengthen them for falls and that sort of thing. But in terms of where that vast majority of that $500,000 has been going, has it been capital, or has it been to any specific department? And is that for the 4 years of this plan?
I'm just going to have Colleen just to highlight the details from the report so that you can sort of see it's really a mix of both, but I'll have Colleen highlight it for you so you can give you a better sense.
Thank you. So, Councillor, in response to your question, each year we have $500,000 in our base budget, and we have an allocation process. So we put out a call of proposals to all of the departments, asking them to submit their proposals that fit in line with the overarching framework for the older adult plan. And then we review those with representatives from different departments, as well as from the Seniors Roundtable, and we have a representative from our community funding team. So we've developed a scoring tool for all of the submissions. And I would say generally, if we look back over the last 4 years, of the $500,000, the majority of the allocation has gone to a number of different program components. So one in particular would be that almost each year we're designating about $100,000 to provide dental care for low-income seniors. So that's a really important contribution that we want to see in place to help low-income seniors. Another area that we've been funding over the last several years would be the pedestrian signals, and those are somewhat costly items. So on average, we're spending about $100,000 of the $500,000 for the pedestrian signals. And then in addition to that, we've had other programs that supplement departmental initiatives. So for example, we have funded in Ottawa Public Health a Community Connect program that is really targeted to working with professionals in the community so that they can identify at-risk, isolated seniors that we can provide support services to. So in those kinds of examples, those are above and beyond what the regular operations would provide for. So it's a combination of some capital investments, it's a combination of some program enhancements, and it's basically working with each of the departments to look at what can they fund within their existing base budgets and what is not able to be funded out of their base budgets, and that's would be the items that we'd be looking at as part of the $500,000 allocation. So it's an amount that each year we start an opening balance with and do the allocation process, and throughout the year we end up with no funds as basically as a carryover because we've allocated within those domains of priorities under the older adult plan.
And so for some departments that some money that's been allocated has been fixed every year, like you mentioned the dental program, so that $100,000 has always been allocated every year for that?
So each year they would be applying, each of those departments would be applying as part of our annual allocation process, but we have made a commitment that we wanted to at least identify $100,000 in terms of social and health supports, so that's why the dental component has been funded each of those years. And then each of the departments submit their proposals and they're rated and ranked, and then we give them the determination of the funds, and we start over again each year. So each year we're basically starting over with a new allocation process.
And other than the dental program, has there been any sort of fixed ones? I know you're saying it's a new process every year, but it sounds like some of the allocations are sort of regular. Other than the dental one, are there ones that are being allocated regularly every year?
Right. So perhaps just another example of ones that we've seen in our allocation each year would be the benches, the park benches. So we've had those in place since we started, and it's an important addition because we're augmenting what other departments are currently providing, and we're saying we really are trying to focus the allocation of those benches in areas that have high density of older adults or facilities that have a high participation take-up in terms of seniors' participation. And then thinking about some of the other programs, there would be the yellow grit boxes, for example. That would be another kind of a capital program helping individuals to prevent slips and falls on winter sidewalks. So we've been funding that as well over the last several years. So those would be some examples of ones that have continued year over year, but again, it's with an annual application. And then in some years, we have a program enhancement that has been in place just for that particular year.
I want to follow up on a point that Councillor Fleury raised about being able to cover all the demographics in terms of seniors and all the various subgroups of seniors. Do you feel that we have good representation of the demographics in our population on the working group, on the people that make that group? Are we reaching out to the people that perhaps won't on their own come forward? Do we understand what their priorities are? Maybe it's not park benches, maybe it's other things. Do we have a good sense of that on the working group?
So the Seniors Roundtable has approximately 23 representatives, and it's definitely represented from the different areas of our city. So we have rural representation, suburban representation, downtown core representation. We have representation from a variety of different community organizations that are providing services to older adults, and we have older adults as residents of the community. There's a diversity representation on the committee for sure. And picking up on Councillor Fleury's previous point, in terms of the isolated at-risk councillors, I think that councillor would be an area that in reconstituting the group going forward for the current term, which we will do in 2016, I think we need to think about how we could do that in a different way with the next group that is constituted. But I would say, other than that in particular, we have around that table a really strong representation and a strong leadership from individuals that speak on behalf of the services that they're providing. So it's, I would say that we feel very confident in terms of the representation on the committee, but I think there's more work to do as we reconstitute for the upcoming term of council. We'll be looking at the isolated, at-risk seniors and, you know, how we have their voice at the table as well, more directly.
The original work also started with over 600 individuals who contributed, and I think the job of the roundtable then is to try and take all of that, try and then focus it down into priorities, and then be able to fit it within the $500,000 that we basically have then to spend. So that's essentially the, we have made sure that there's as much input and as much outline, and what we began to see in the 600 is they're very good at outlining where there's commonality in those themes, and that's the information we take back to departments to say, here's commonality in those themes, and I think Councillor Nussbaum identified one that we heard frequently, and that was one of the things that we really pushed in terms of being able to include that in the older adult plan.
Which one was that?
That's with respect to intersections and delaying. So the numbers of intersections retrofitted and coming up is increasing because of this initiative, for example.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And I think, as we approach our budget process too, that, as many of my colleagues pointed out, we have an increasing population of seniors. So I think we need to look at that number and think, is 500,000 enough, or do we need to do more for seniors? So something I think for this committee to consider moving forward, but certainly very appreciative of staff's efforts and former Chair Taylor's efforts and your efforts to continued work on this file. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kaklish. Seeing no one else, I just wanted to add my thanks to the very dedicated group of volunteers that make up the roundtable, and also the solid staff support that the roundtable has received. And I think you can see in the plan the leadership that has gone into this plan. So on the report, carried. Thank you. Item number 5, we do have 3 more items. It is 11:25, so maybe we can just pick up the pace a little bit. So item number 5 is the SAMS update.
I don't have questions.
Well, I think Aaron had a brief presentation. Aaron, you wanted to say a few words on SAMS?
Yes, Chair. I'll divide it into 3 sections quickly. The first is with respect to an update on training, because this has been a key issue identified by staff. At this point, the province has developed now over 30 training modules that will be used for the application. I want to commend, we have 2 frontline staff that we actually sent from Ottawa to participate and to develop those modules, and they've had a tremendous influence in helping the province to get something that frontline staff can use. One of the areas in training that we're still not particularly, I would say, pleased about at this point is we've been advocating for some time that the province needs to set up regional training centers for this application. It's a very complex application, and the notion that we have to train and retrain our own staff without dedicated training resources, in our view, is just, there's a better way to do this. And we've been saying they need to set up regional training centers that we send staff to be competent before they're being thrown on the line and then essentially having to be coached by their co-worker sitting next to them. So we're still trying to make progress on that issue, but we haven't seen movement provincially. In terms of staffing is a key part of it. We've completed 16 competitions and we've placed over 65 staff into positions to fill vacancies. So we've ensured that we are continuing to maintain our complement of staff so that we can actually deal with the service demands that come through. We have made some progress in stabilizing the workforce without essentially going beyond what we would essentially be able to accommodate within our budgets. one of the key things that I need to acknowledge is that part of the reason we've been able to work within that envelope and within those staffing is because the province has provided us relief in terms of some of the work that we're required to do. So the last thing I'll deal with is the budget, and we know that in the Q2 forecast that we were showing a $1.2 million deficit by the end of the year. When the budget comes out, and I wanted to make sure that committee was aware of this, you will see some revised numbers based on the Q3 or the third quarter results, and I do not anticipate that we will continue to show that level of deficit by that time. The numbers are coming in better, again, with the province having provided us with some relief. The budget is relatively complex with a number of different sources, and they're allowing at this time for us to maintain some of those other sources, which will help with this. So we should be coming in much better than is currently showing, and we'll have a better estimate by then. So I just wanted to leave it at that. Hopefully that gives you an idea.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Burr. Any questions? Okay, received on the report. Turning then to item number 6, Ottawa Fire Services provision of dispatch services to other municipalities.
Next round.
Good morning, Chair. So as they're getting set up, and I'll pass it over to the fire chief in a moment, just to give you a bit of background. This is an initiative that the chief and his team have looked at as we've been looking through the term of council and our budgets. Obviously, as we discussed yesterday, as was discussed yesterday at council, we're looking at different opportunities for revenue streams as well as efficiencies. And the fire team has, because of the relationship they have with their colleagues around the province, an opportunity has presented itself. So I'll let the chief explain to you what this opportunity is for revenue and the capacity that we have to be able to take perhaps something new on.
There we go. An overview of my short presentation today. We'll talk about the current dispatch service, a revenue opportunity for the City of Ottawa, and of course what we require as next steps. Our dispatch service currently is the first point of contact for obviously the Ottawa Fire Service, Clarence Rockland, and the Township of North Dundas in an emergency where fire is the lead agency. We are currently generating revenue with existing agreements with Clarence Rockland, which, by the way, is part of the United Counties of Prescott-Russell, and the North Dundas. The Ottawa Fire Service has identified an opportunity to provide dispatch services for other municipalities, and as a result, generate more revenue. Of course, this would be at no cost to the City of Ottawa. Each municipality that we're dealing with has a unique technology requirements that may require capital investment in order to receive dispatch services from the Ottawa Fire Service at their own cost. Their consultant pointed out that even with these investments, their municipalities would see a cost savings over the next 5 years if they were to switch over to the Ottawa Fire Service Dispatch Center. However, before each municipality pursues technology upgrades, they are seeking an indication from the City of Ottawa as an agreement, if an agreement is actually feasible. So this, again, agreement that we are looking to enter into would not impact our service delivery. And if all of the municipalities decide to switch their dispatch service over to the Ottawa Fire Service, it will result in approximately a $250,000 revenue. And again, no additional costs or negative service impact to our fire service. So what we're hoping to receive today is approval in our first step to begin negotiations with an agreement with the United Counties of Prescott-Russell, North Glengarry, North Stormont, to provide them with the dispatch service in order to generate revenue for the City of Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. And obviously, we're all happy to hear the potential for new revenue sources, and this sounds like a great idea. But I just did want to probe a little bit on how we can have, one, no additional costs, and two, no negative impact if we're using the same resources and spreading them thinner. So could you just explain that to us?
Sure. Our staffing model and communications division is based on the ability to handle several major incidents simultaneously. Looking into where we're the United Prescott-Russell area, they would generate another estimated 3,300 calls, which represents only 4% of our annual call volume. And again, although the utilization of our communication personnel will increase, we're comfortable that those calls will not impact our ability to process multiple incidents. We cannot go below, we have a threshold where we are, but we did a core services review not long ago, and we found that there is a small opportunity for us to increase without impacting our service negatively.
Okay, so you have capacity available within the service right now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockington.
The definition of dispatch services is strictly you take a call and you dispatch services that are not Ottawa Fire Service firefighters. Who's going to fight the fire or go to the accident?
Through you, Madam Chair. The dispatch is it's an own division that handles all incoming calls when it's fire-related, right? So we dispatch through our computer-aided dispatch system all of the Ottawa Fire Services, plus a number of other municipalities. So this would be no different. It wouldn't involve the Ottawa Fire Service firefighters being dispatched. Each individual department will have its core.
Excellent. I just wanted to confirm we're only talking about dispatch services, and the context or definition of dispatch is simply taking the call and relaying that call to the county for their firefighters to tackle.
I can confirm that, yes.
Okay, very good. Okay. How do you come up with the number 250,000? How is that calculated?
Of course, when we look at, it's usually per capita. A typical cost would be per capita. And we looked at industry best standards, so we have a number in mind, which of course that we'd like to negotiate with those municipalities. And that's how we came out. It's the per capita based on those departments that we wish to do dispatching for.
And finally, what term of contract are you looking for? And is there any way to, after 6 months or a year, if things aren't working out or if the impact or volume is too much for us to take on, is there a clause where we can terminate that agreement?
Yes, those are all things that we'll be looking at negotiating as well.
Thank you. Councillor Brockington, Councillor Kadri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I just want to come back to, in terms of the service that we're providing, as Councillor Brockington just mentioned, strictly a dispatch service, right? That's what you've confirmed so far.
That's correct.
In terms of these municipalities, and I know City of Ottawa has standard times of response, and I'm sure these municipalities have those same time responses also. Is there any obligation for us to make sure that those response times are being handled properly, or is that the responsibility of each municipality that's handling those currently?
Each municipality will be responsible for their own response criteria of their effective response force. In our dispatch center, we strive to maintain our NFPA standard and our current standard of how many minutes it takes to process a call. So we make sure that we stay within those time frames. So.
Yeah, my concern is going forward, if one of these municipalities does come up with an issue about the response time and they come to blame the City of Ottawa dispatch service, that would be a concern for me, and I'm sure those of my colleagues are on the table. And I don't want to belabor that point, but I hope that the department has thought about that and put in either some contingencies or some views on that to explain to these municipalities that we're not going to be responsible for those response times.
You are correct, and part of the standard will also have a redundancy built in as a backup to their primary system. The infrastructure will have to be built in such a manner as to make sure that they have the same standard as we currently have within our fire service and the fire services that we provide dispatching service for.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kadri. Councillor DeRoos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I just thank you very much for this initiative and trying to find us money. I want to echo my colleague Chad about the response and liability. It's very important that we look into the liability of what's going to bring to the City of Ottawa and the taxpayer, because we don't want to find revenue and then we end up in the cuff for different liability. It depends on an incident. They could blame different municipality that the City of Ottawa was responsible for whatever fatality or something happened. So we want to make sure that we are also protected from that point of view and that liability.
Through you, Madam Chair, we will certainly ensure that there's language in place for that.
Thank you, Councillor DeRoos. Councillor Eglai.
Two questions. First, I want to follow up on the comment you said you're going to add about 3,500 calls, I think, and that's only 4%. How many calls does the fire department get in a year?
When we talk about call volume, we're talking about the number of phone calls into the dispatch center.
Correct.
Okay, so we have presently 85,000 calls coming into our dispatch center today.
Just for fire services?
That's correct. They're not all incidents, right? They could
no,
be,
I hope not.
Yeah, they could be as easy as, we're testing our alarm system today, so if you get a false alarm from this address, that's why it's happening. Inquiries, open air fire permits, those types of.
That makes me feel a little better.
Yeah.
The question I have is, you said there's no additional cost, so I assume we're not hiring new staff out of the 250 to do this.
You are correct.
But where are we on a liability perspective? Are we increasing the city's liability if somehow our dispatch service makes a mistake and there's an incident with the client?
Through you, Chair. So certainly, and as was explained in some of the questions, there's the dispatch component, so we'll receive the call and we'll dispatch the appropriate municipality. They're responsible for their, as the Chief mentioned, their response time, their effective response force. But we will have a responsibility to process the call as per whatever contractual agreement we have. So there's a responsibility. Will there be a liability attached to that? We'll make sure there's good language, but certainly I would suggest to you, in knowing the fire service and the tremendous work your dispatch center does, we're not taking anything on that's very complex or additional liability. They do it on a daily basis in Ottawa. They're just going to be responding to somebody else's call for another municipality and then advising that fire service, you have a fire at 123 Main Street, proceed. So that's where our liability is limited to. We have to act appropriately, and I don't think there's much risk there with regards to additional burden on the municipality.
I get that. I guess the question I'm asking is, I don't know how the system works now. I don't know if for whatever reason our dispatch service makes an error, whether we're self-insured or whether we buy outside insurance. And if we do buy outside insurance, do we have to increase the cost of that insurance to take on this contract?
Chair, that's actually an excellent question. So the city does have an insurance, so we have an insurance broker that we annually have, and there's a minimum amount like you have in your house insurance that you pay off, so we're responsible for an amount. Anything over and above that, the insurance would take over and intervene. So that already exists for us, and that insurance would cover off this new responsibility that, as the Chief mentioned, we're already doing for some of the municipalities in the United Counties of Prescott-Russell. So we're kind of expanding that role. So very good question. So I want to reassure this committee that within our current context, there's really the risk is not
Appreciate
major.
that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eglai. Seeing no further questions, I just have one. Oh, Councillor Kakish.
Thanks, Chair. Who's currently providing the dispatch services for them, and are we approaching them, or are they approaching us about providing the service?
Currently, the city of Hawkesbury is providing that service, but the municipalities of the United Counties of Prescott-Russell approached us. They had hired a consultant to look into. The costs were escalating quite rapidly with Hawkesbury, so they started looking at some of their options, and they approached us.
Do we know how much they were?
I know that the consultant report says that there would be a 20% savings for them.
Okay. And, I appreciate the innovative ideas of bringing in revenue, but I also want assurances from you that you're doing everything you can as well to find savings internally within the department as well.
Certainly. This was part of that exercise.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kakish. Anyone else? Seeing none, just one final question. Chief, how long would you expect these negotiations to take, and when could we as a committee expect you to report back to us?
Good question, Madam Chair. I think we can start negotiations as soon as it's approved at Council. We have done some preliminary discussions, obviously, because they have approached us. They are currently signed with Hawkesbury, and at all parties, each individual municipality could leave with a 6-month notice. They have in that contract.
Okay, so you would report back to us after a successful negotiation, but not waiting the 6 months to start?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Drews.
Sorry, Chair, I just want to bring one more problem to the attention, Chief. Through the Chair, when we did the amalgamation, I remember how much duplication of street names we have, and we've been going through this since the amalgamation. I just want to make sure that other townships, they don't have this similar issue, and then it's going to create a huge response time. And then I'm really worried a little bit about liability, but also we went through this in 2000, and I know you're well aware of it. I just want to bring this to your attention, to making sure that we don't oversee an issue that's going to reflect back on us.
Through you, Chair, yes, we're very aware of that, but our computer-aided dispatch system differentiates municipalities. The dilemma when we all amalgamated is because we all became an Ottawa address, so there was a duplication of streets. Because we do Clarence, Rockland, and North Dundas, we have some of those issues, or we don't have an issue. It's taken care of within our computer-aided dispatch system and our mapping.
Thank you very much.
Okay, anyone else? Seeing none, carried on the recommendations? Carried, thank you. Okay, turning then to item number 7, the public art policy renewal. Okay, Mr. Chenier, over to you.
Morning, Madam Chair, and thank you. Given the time, I'll try to breeze through this rather quickly. We'll just go to the first slide. So, members of the committee, we're bringing to you this morning a revised public art policy. The City of Ottawa has had a public art policy in one form or another for over 30 years, so this is nothing new. And a lot of the things that are contained in our new policy are not changing a lot. They are reflective of a tried and true approach to doing public art in the city. The City of Ottawa, the RMOC, Nepean, and Gloucester in former days had a public art policy, and all through the city you can see manifestations. We have pictures of some of the public art that already adorns our streets and our buildings. So what we're really doing is pulling together the policies of legacy municipalities into one consolidated policy so that we have one document that is current, that's coherent. In the past, when there have been challenges to the policy or questions about the policy, we were running back to old documents from the 80s and the 90s to confirm, validate, prove policy positions. So with this revision, we will have a new Made in Ottawa current policy. Why are we doing this? The renewed action plan for arts, heritage, and culture directed that this should be a priority for us to come forward with. And so starting in May 2012, we pulled together a group called the Public Art Review Committee, made up of both internal staff, but more importantly, stakeholders, experts out in the community. I was happy to see this morning that two of them, the chair and vice chair, Alistair and Sandra, are here with us, and I believe are on the speakers roster, and that is great. So we had a 12-member team. We also had honorary chairs, which in recent times were Councillor Deans was our honorary chair, and in the previous term, Councillor Taylor, and they provided us with political advice, the guidance on policy issues, those kinds of things that served us well in terms of developing a final document. As well, extensive public consultations. We reached out and did interviews with over 40 stakeholders out in the community. We held an event here at City Hall that had a very good turnout, and touch base with most organizations that are involved in art and culture in this community. What's staying the same? The basis of all of the former policies were a transparent, competitive process for selecting public art, and that continues. The peer-assessed jury process for most of our procurement, most of our show selections remains intact and is strengthened. The 1% for art on projects over $2 million, this, as you would expect, would be a point of challenge on a policy like this as we go forward, because this reflects the existing policy. And so we did look and ask ourselves the question, should it still be 1%, or should we try to move that to something more? And is the $2 million still a relevant project threshold to be applying this to? Our conclusion was that yes, in fact, this was still relevant, that both applying the 1% on $2 million projects, both those factors seem to be giving us the scale of project, the types of projects that we were looking for. And so the recommendation in the policy is to stay the course in that respect. We've better defined the projects that will apply, that the commissions will apply for, because as you might expect with the legacy policies, the wording was not as succinct as it might be. And we've also committed, as part of once we have a policy in hand, to develop some administrative guidelines and procedures that will hopefully provide great clarity to all of this. The policy will continue to collect art and circulate it into city facilities. In the last terms of council, you've seen a lot of that now at City Hall as a great place to show public art, and of course the moving the Karsh Masson Gallery has also assisted in that. And then some of the connected programs, mentoring artists in residence, those kinds of programs also continue. So what's new? What's new is that we will have one policy document. We will create an interdepartmental working group to talk about public art and public art projects, because as you might expect, even though Parks, Recreation and Culture houses the Public Art Office, Infrastructure Services, Public Works, a variety of other departments are involved in the maintenance and the construction projects that the art is associated with. And so we will bring together that partnership in an organized internal group to make sure that our work is consistent, is coherent, that we're picking the right locations for projects, all of those things. It reestablishes a former practice from the City of Ottawa of a public art external committee, so bringing together academics, those that are in artists that are out in the community, organizations that delve into public art, as an advisory committee for the city that will help us both on policy-related matters and to adjudicate some very specific issues that might come along as we move on. A new innovation is the opportunity to pool funds, and this is a best practice across Canadian municipalities that we've included in our policy, although we have clarified in recent times that our ability to pool funds will be limited to only certain sources of funding, and most specifically, development charge and rate-funded projects at this time cannot be pooled. And so the opportunity to apply that will have to be developed and worked on with staff, but we are looking for approval to, at least in concept, be able to pool funds to create projects in very visible locations, to expand the locations where projects can be created, and to get out in some of the areas of the city that currently don't have a lot of public art. Creating a mentorship opportunities, both for our commission programs where emerging artists can work with established artists and hone their skills, providing that opportunity to help build the artistic community in the city. And then, of course, clearer guidelines for public art on city and private land, including working with the private sector. There is some interest in private developments now to include public art, and our staff have been working with some developers. We want to expand this by providing better guidelines, advice on how to do this. And I think that's the last slide, so I will open to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chenier. The first question goes to Councillor Fleury.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, and congratulations on the 30 years. I know that with the help of staff, we were able to showcase some of the work or the boards in the Waller Mall, and that was truly appreciated by the community. We've also opened recently the public art on Rideau Street, which again drew amazing crowds from the community and from the local community as well as the artistic community. My specific question, and I'm comfortable with the direction. I'm confused about the $2 million element in the context of. I'll use the example for Vanier this summer. We have many residential streets that were done. Individually, the project were tendered under $2 million, but if you put all of the projects within a vicinity of, let's say, 500 meters, you'd extend over the $2 million mark. So I wonder how that would draw the funding for public art.
Chair, in an ideal world, we would be able to puzzle together a lot of those smaller projects, but our approach has been, and the recommendation is for it to continue to do this, is to really look at this on a project level, so that if you have large bulk funding envelopes like sidewalk replacements or road replacements or all of those things, we really only target those that are over $2 million. We don't target the entire envelope. I know Mr. Newell is here if you have deeper questions on that, but the intent of this policy and the practice to date has been to limit it to the large reconstruction projects that are over $2 million and not to put all the projects together.
But I think in that case it undermines the idea of pooling the funds together, because part of the issue is that in that community, for example, in Vanier, you'll see nothing off the main street because there's no project significant enough for those public arts in parks, in small parks, for example. So I wonder if we could give direction to amend that. Maybe it's a context of meters around the projects. I understand the risk of just saying, hey, I'm going to pull 2 million projects randomly across the city. That's not the intent. But if there are smaller projects in residential that, if we are able to pull them together, would be above 2 million, is there some wording that would clarify, that could clarify that?
if that's the intent, then we could certainly develop wording that would address that particular. The notion of pooling was really to take money from eligible projects, but where the installation would not be a particularly appropriate site for public art, to pool the money and then to build projects at another location. If I understand your explanation of pooling would be to pool projects in a geographic area to install in that geographic area, which is something a bit different, and staff could certainly work on a motion.
Could we have a motion, I don't know if, because there might be cost elements or other perspective, but could we have it for, if we can't approve it today, for council to look at ahead of this?
Could you do it that fast, or I suppose alternatively for budget?
I think we could turn this around relatively quickly. I think the wording wouldn't be particularly difficult, but we would have to consult with our ISD folks.
Does the funding come out of the project per se?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I think what the councillor is suggesting is that we would combine a certain number of projects within a local neighborhood to achieve the $2 million and then apply the 1%. And what that geographic area would be in terms of description, I think we'd have to discuss and come up with something.
Okay.
Just to bring it on the table, I think you either do it that way, the way I described it in the context of residential streets, or you do a citywide fund where all of the residential streets that were done across the city, you pull a 1%, and that becomes a citywide pool that then you can apply on a given project. I'm fine with whatever way, but if the vision is to build public art in residential areas and to expand the program beyond our main streets, then we should be looking at this in this context, I find.
Might be an important time to mention Councillor Nussbaum had to leave early today, but he did speak to the city staff before he left about the $2 million threshold, and his question was, could that threshold, what would the implications be of reducing that threshold to a lower number so that there'd be more projects? So maybe when you're doing the work for Councillor Fleury, you could also address that question of the impacts to the city of reducing the threshold.
And so I had two other quick questions. One is, so once the public art piece is up, whose responsibility is it to animate? So I'll give you the example of, I think it's on West Wellington where they've decided the public art was really around food. It was like corn and stuff like that, if I remember correctly. And I see the responsibility of the community to, animate the community, the elements and stuff, but is there attached to this program some engagement strategies post-implementation with the artist? I think that would go a long way in continuing some of the goals of supporting the art. I know there's the cultural days, but I don't know beyond that if we truly engage with those public art pieces.
Chair, I'll ask Julie DuPont, who administers the program, to answer that.
Chair. We do collaborate with the Community Arts Program, with the BIAs in the neighborhoods, and with other special projects that go on, whether it's Nuit Blanche or other things like that, where there is a program already happening. We will work with them to leverage something that's already going on or to work with them. We have artist talks as well. An artist will walk through a community and they'll talk about the work and the process to get it there. So we do it, and we can expand that as well.
It's good. A lot of members of around the table and our colleagues go to so many events. It'd be nice to plan, for us to plan ahead so that we can truly engage the community when those events do come about, because I do think they're focal points and gathering points for the community. My final, it's a comment, is that we've seen also a lot of private sector partners who are getting into the public art program and interest. And I just want to highlight the Rideau Center, the exterior facade. They've consulted with our arts and culture group. It's amazing. And I think that should just demonstrate that we have a fair balance in our approach and that it's shown to be quite successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fleury. I just wanted to acknowledge the presence presence today of Alistair McRae and Sandra Dick from the Public Art Renewal Committee. They're here. They're not proposing to speak unless someone had a specific question for them. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to underscore the need to spread these resources out in not just the downtown core, but, you know, I'm still within the old City of Ottawa boundaries, and we would love to have art as part of a revitalization of our communities. So I know you're aware of this, but I just want to underscore that there are folks who would love to see this in the suburbs, or at least in the urban core as well. If I could just deviate, I have no issues with the policy itself, but rather I want to have a better understanding. If you don't have the answers today, that's fine, but I'd like to follow up. Do we have an accurate estimate of the value of our artwork? Do we have a list, a precise inventory of what we own, where it's located, and what it's valued at?
Madam Chair, yes, we do. I believe the proper number is $12 million for our collection. That doesn't include the Firestone collection, which I believe is another $16 million. It's just... I was close. $13.2 million for our collection and $23.49 for the Firestone collection. As I understand it, we're just undergoing an appraisal right now of the collection, which we do every 5 years. Part of this policy is to continue to do that. And then, of course, provision for this policy is to maintain, secure, have a robust system of tracking the art, is all part of current practice, but also reiterated in this policy.
So a lot of our art is hanging in public facilities, and I don't know if we have the more valuable pieces under tarp and in storage, or whether they are still, you know, in rooms and community centers and other public facilities. But do we have a fair amount of inventory in storage that never sees the light of day?
Chair, we have generally between 80 and 85% of the collection out in circulation, and security hardware is on all the work, regardless of value.
All right, thank you. And finally, do we have an estimate of our annual expenditure on art acquisition?
$150,000, Chair.
Very well, okay. So I appreciate that information. I'm not suggesting we have a garage sale, but I think people need to realize that there are assets in place that the city owns with respect to art, that we recognize the importance of art, but also we have to have a discussion about prioritization, particularly in years of lean budgets. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Kadri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My question is just a simple question. In terms of timelines, when a project comes on the table for development or reconstruction, at what point in that project time frame does the art department get involved and say, here's a project that we want to do as part of the money? Is it right at the initiation of that project or halfway through? The reason I'm asking the question, Mr. Chenier, is the fact that hearing from the public that there isn't enough time for them to have input into the program or into the project. So based on that is where my question is coming from.
Thank you, Chair. Ideally, identifying the funds for public art as early in the process as possible is the most ideal, because in many cases we like to look at the opportunities to integrate art into whether it's a building or whatever it is that's being constructed. That isn't always the case, but earlier the better. In terms of public consultation, perhaps I can let Julie talk about that piece of it and people's opportunity to comment into a project as it's being implemented.
Chair, the artists are hopefully brought in at the design stage, which is fairly early on, and then through the public consultations, we can feed that information back to them, and then those are the shortlisted artists, and then they go through a process of developing proposals. Those proposals are shown to a jury and to the community in advance, and those community comments are taken into context as well when decisions are being made by the jury. So they are done well in advance.
Thank you for that. The question about the artist selection, is that a predetermined process, or is that by project each time that the project is approved for the funding?
It's generally, it's a bit of both, honestly. It takes about 6 months to get an artist on board, and it also depends on the complexity of the project and when we are brought into it by our colleagues. So we try to get in as quickly as possible, but that doesn't always happen that way, and that's what we're trying to, through this new policy, improve.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cadre. Councillor Fleury.
So I just want to clarify what I was asking. So instead of looking at the citywide, pulling the small amounts citywide, I think what I'm asking specifically is projects that are within geographic areas. How can, if they're totaling over $2 million, what will be the factor that will enable them to trigger some public art? That's basically what I'm asking, is how can we consider, and this is specific to residential areas. That's all.
Chair, we'll take that away, and Wayne and I will have that discussion.
Okay. Seeing no one else, can we carry this report? Carried. Okay, we'll move to inquiries. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of Councillor Leeper, he has asked me to ask on his behalf the following, and I will forward this to the committee coordinator as well. What child care centers are losing city funding as a result of the city's new child care funding formula, and what are the amounts being cut for each center? And a supplementary, the city's new child care funding formula is to redress previous funding inequities. How did these inequities arise?
So the simple answer is there is no childcare that's losing city funding, if that's what the question is. What we're dealing with is provincial funding. And the City Council this year was basically addressed in February a funding formula that had been directed by the province of Ontario, namely that previous envelopes of funding going back over several generations no longer existed any longer. There was a new fund referred to as a general operating grant, and the city was to distribute that group in an equitable way. The area that we had some discretion in was A, timing, and B, how the equity formula would be determined. Those are the two things that are within the purview of City Council. What that equity funding would result in was, for some agencies, a potential loss in funding. On a per-space basis, in other words, for not-for-profit licensed childcare, there were licensed childcares who were receiving funding. Only about a third of all agencies were receiving between $50 and approximately $5,000 per space in general revenues coming into that childcare agency. Roughly 50% were receiving none, zero. Given all the changes today, it is not reasonable to expect a community-based childcare agency to remain open and viable without government funding. So that is the short answer. I can provide details. I think this is an issue that potentially needs to be reviewed again because it's complex.
And this is an inquiry, so maybe we can have more complex answer later.
Yes.
Would that be okay?
Yes, but I wanted to make sure that, because I know the budget delegations and questions are happening now, and it's being raised by groups in your individual wards, and there's not completely accurate in terms of saying it's city funding. It is not city funding.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Any other inquiries? I do have one. I don't know if Mr. Chenier, if you want to offer a short answer today or if you'd like to wait, I'll leave that up to you. But in light of the sudden halt of Opera Lyra operations, can the Community and Protective Services Committee receive an update on the impact on city budgets of this change?
Madam Chair, the City of Ottawa, through its cultural funding program, does fund Opera Lyra on an annual basis. The amount is in the area of $223,000. Like the rest of us, we found out yesterday that they had ceased operations. What this means, of course, is for 2015, staff are currently following up with the group in terms of what is happening, what the intent is. The impact on city budgets would be that if the group is not to resume operations in 2016, then the funding allocation that would be made to them would be freed up.
And would we expect to recover any of the 2015 dollars that were given to that organization?
Because we have not contacted the group yet, we're really not sure of the state of affairs, both financially and in terms of future intent. I've heard through some media outlets that they may take a bit of time and resume operations or come up with another operational plan. Yesterday, our staff were attempting to contact them to look at intent. Of course, if there is city funding that hasn't been paid out, but I don't believe that is the case, given that we're in October, but if that were the case, then of course we would suspend payment until the matter's clarified.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other inquiries? Other business? Adjourned. Thank you.